Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Two Way. We've got a lot going on, and we're going to bring in some of our participants when they're ready, when they're here. But let me just run through why we're convening right now. There's a lot going on as we speak. JD Vance is speaking at a rally. Went very hard at Vice President Harris there. We'll talk a little bit about that. The ads that are on the air in the battleground states. I want to show you a graphic of what was on the air in one Philadelphia station this morning. You can see there. Let me minimize myself so you can see this. So there is the ads that ran on the NBC affiliate this morning in Philadelphia. 100% of the ads were either negative ads about the vice president or positive ads about the vice president. And obviously, not a huge surprise, but clearly a big difference of what we'd be seeing if this were still a Biden-Trump race. So that's a major difference from just a little over a week ago. Project 2025 was basically shut down today. The Heritage Foundation, the person who was running it is gone, and the Trump campaign put out yet another statement repudiating it. I was surprised and wrong about how much of an impact that was having on the debate, how much it was energizing people on the left. Because clearly it was, and you saw that in every piece of qualitative research. You saw that in the rhetoric of Democrats, and you saw that quite obviously in the reaction of Republicans who in Mar-a-Lago were constantly repudiating it and saying that this was not something that represented the Trump campaign. So it's an interesting question, which we're going to talk about, which is there going to be lingering damage to the Republicans from that? If you're following the news in the Middle East, you know that Israel struck inside a Beirut suburb, claiming they were targeting Hezbollah commander. Many people in the administration and folks around the world believe that this is as close to potentially widespread conflict as we've seen. And obviously, Israel's going to face a lot of choices now about whether to continue to pursue strikes there, whether there be ground conflict. We don't know. But that's obviously something that we're all going to be watching. And we're going to talk today about the implications of that for the presidential race, if any. On the question of the Veep stakes, I continue to not really understand what's going on. I'm hoping some folks on here will have insight into that. There's no doubt that the question of how big the number of people under considerations are is up in the air. And it's been reported by Reuters and confirmed by other organizations now that the vice president plans to travel next week with her running mate. And so presumably we're expecting an announcement sooner rather than later, up against the deadline of the first week of August. Super curious to see what happens with that, obviously, and we'll talk about that as well with our guests and then with all of you. Finally, starting to see some public and private polling to give us a sense of what we're going to talk about a lot today, which is how has the race changed with Kamala Harris replacing Joe Biden? You see, without a doubt, now she's doing better. No, I shouldn't say without a doubt. Preliminary census, she's doing better with some groups like pro-choice voters, worse in one private poll I saw today with others like voters over 50. And obviously, she needs to do better than Joe Biden was doing. That means she needs net to be doing better overall. And as of now, I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today is she going to net do better? Certainly Democrats believe that she will, but we don't know that yet. And so that's something we're going to talk about. I'm going to now start to bring in folks. So let's ask Speaker Gingrich to come in. Speaker Gingrich, if you could turn on your video, I'll bring you in. There we go. Mr. Speaker, welcome. Thank you for joining. Love for you to start out while we wait for the others to join and just say how you see the race overall right now in terms of what's changed in your mind from when it was Trump versus Biden to now Harris versus Trump. Oh, sorry. Need you to unmute. Thank you.
There. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Well, I think you have to start and say it is a totally different race. I mean, I don't think you can, somehow mutate from a decaying Biden who was, I think, almost certainly going to lose, to a totally different race with a totally different dynamic, with a totally different Democratic candidate, with an enormous surge of both money and energy on the Democratic side. And I think that this is probably part of the shock of the Trump team right now, that, they were sitting there Sunday morning. They'd had a good convention. They felt very good about things in general. He had come out of the near disaster in Butler as somebody who had enormously increased the emotional affection with his base. And I think they had, I'm guessing, but my guess is that Susie and Chris and the rest of them felt like they had a pretty guaranteed track to winning. And by Sunday evening, that was all a shambles. And so part of what's going on, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect, is a profound rethinking of where they are and what their strategy is going to be. I mean, I certainly hope that's true, since I'm for them. They can't run Biden part 2 and have any hope of succeeding. On the other hand, they can run, Kamala Harris, San Francisco radical, and slightly, this will probably be a race between the two weirds. The Democrats will do everything they can to communicate that Trump and J.D. Vance are weird, and I suspect Trump and J.D. Vance's people will do everything they can to communicate that Kamala is weird. And it'll be a very interesting race in terms of just the sheer volume. I know we're putting together right now all of the video we can find of Kamala, so I don't say anything. I'm not going to attack her at all. I'm just going to put up item after item after item of her being nuts, and say, let the facts speak. Now, so the Democrats will then be aggressively trying to disown who she has been, and the Republicans will be aggressively trying to convince people that she is who she has been. And I think it's, if you're interested in the game of politics, this may be among the most interesting 90+ days that you and I will ever live through.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those of you new to the platform, whether you're watching on two-way or whether you're watching on YouTube, it's a platform for long, sophisticated conversations that are meant to educate and learn. Everybody here is going to be civil and nice. We're going to take your questions when you come on, and we ask you to emulate the spirit of Doug Sosnick, Joe Scarborough, and Newt Gingrich, which is we're here to learn and listen rather than attack. That's not what this platform's for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Doug, you have as much command, at least 13 days ago you did, of the fundamentals of the race, of why Joe Biden was in such a dire position, which you wrote in your last memo about Biden-Trump. What is your sense now of where the race stands? How is it different from before, to the Democrats' advantage or to their disadvantage now that it's Harris-Trump?
Well, first of all, I mostly agree with what Speaker Gingrich said, which I never thought in my life I'd ever say something like that. I do think that while I agree with what he said, I do think there's some similarities to the race that haven't changed. And that starts with the Electoral College map. You still got to get to 270. The map still favors the Republicans. And I think that it's interesting with Harris. I think she'll be more competitive in these Sun Belt states and may actually be able to offer up more than one path to 270. But she could also, I think, have more challenges in the Midwestern states. You mentioned earlier about the older voters. And so I think that she could end up either being much more competitive in all 7 states, or she could end up actually having a map that's not that much more favorable to her than it was for Biden, based on the demographics and the numbers. I'll just add a couple of final things. I do think we're going to have the biggest gender gap in the history of American politics, both because of the nature of Harris's candidacy, the nature of Trump's presidency and his campaign, and just for good order, bringing Vance on the ticket. Just about Trump, I'll say one thing I've always been struck about Trump: he doesn't do nuance, he doesn't shift gears, he just does one thing. And I think his one thing particularly does not work well running against a woman, and particularly does not run well running against a Black woman. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he manages that. And I'll have to say, I think they've run an excellent campaign, Trump has. But I was shocked at how flat-footed they were when Biden got out and Harris was the de facto nominee within 24 hours. Not only did they not, were they not ready with their narrative, and you had all these freelancers on the Hill, telling a DEI candidate, but they still haven't figured out, as the speaker said, they still don't know what their case and negative is against her. And the last thing I'll say is, I actually think that by Labor Day, we're going to pretty much know where the race is going to end up. I kind of look at the polls now because I have to, because I'm an addict, but I don't take, we don't really know what's going on. And these polls are interesting and, you should look at them. But, 3 weeks of Harris rolling out a VP and having a convention and Trump, tarring her with all the negatives, and we'll see who wins the battle to define Harris. But I'm pretty confident that by the end of August, we're going to have a pretty good handle on where this race is going.
Thank you. Joe, I got an email right before we started from somebody who said, what happens when a candidate who can't possibly win runs against someone who's guaranteed to lose? And I asked the person which candidate was which, and he said exactly. So tell us how you see the race, what's fundamentally different or the same from when it was Biden versus Trump.
Well, I remember when it was Biden versus Trump, and we were on this call, and a lot of people were saying the race was over, and I said it's July. And you said, Mark, at the time there were going to be 3 dramatic turns still ahead after the debate, and nobody envisioned this. But I'd said we're a 46-46 nation then, not a 50-50 nation, but a 46-46 nation then. I saw a Florida Atlantic poll today that I think Drudge, it got linked through Drudge, that I laughed at because it's 46-46. And think about what we've all been through over the past month, right? We had the most historic debate since the 1960 JFK Nixon debate. We had the LBJ resignation, or dropping out of the race basically in 1968, which was earth-shattering. And we had an assassination attempt, which was the biggest Secret Service failure since 1963. And we're a 46-46 nation. I will say just a couple of quick things about where this race goes. I think Republicans are probably going to have a hard time, like Republicans did in 2008. We thought in 2008 we're going to be able to say Barack Obama is the 3rd most liberal member of the United States Senate, Reverend Wright, Bill Ayers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you heard that just repeat. People didn't care because he was a pop icon. And something you said this morning, I think, Mark, in your newsletter, I thought was so fascinating. Nobody would have predicted this when Kamala Harris took over for Joe Biden. But just talking to people who don't usually talk to me about politics, Kamala Harris has seemed to become a pop culture icon, at least for, maybe it's the Bay City Rollers on Howard Cosell Live in 1977. Maybe it's just for a week or two. Yet, and Doug remembers that. We don't know how long that's going to be, but you find out at some point the Bay City Rollers, as George Martin said to his daughter, no, honey, they're not the Beatles, and they're not going to be the Beatles. Maybe Kamala Harris is not going to be the Beatles. Maybe she ends up being the Bay City Rollers, but I will tell you right now, she has pierced this pop culture veil, and she's become to a lot of people more than a politician, like Donald Trump was in 2016, like Barack Obama was in 2008. And I think what's so fascinating about this is none of us, nobody on this call would have predicted this. And so if they can figure out how to continue building on that, and I doubt they can, just because it's hard. What goes up must come down. But if they can, then just like with Barack Obama in 2008, the San Francisco liberal thing won't work.
Right.
San Francisco thing, by the way, San Francisco liberal thing worked in 1984 because it was Ronald Reagan on the other side of it, who again was a guy that again was so much bigger than just most other politicians. So we'll see what happens. But right now, I've got to say it's still way too early. We've had just an extraordinarily momentous month, and we're still basically where we were in early July or early June.
Yeah. I want to throw out some topics, and I'd just like the three of you to talk. I'll sit and listen, but I'd love for the three of you, rather than talk serially, I'd love for you guys to just kind of have a dialogue amongst the three of you. And again, if you want to get in on the conversation, please raise your hand. We'll get to you all shortly. I want to start with the question of asymmetrical advantages. And I'm curious now, Mr. Speaker, start with you. And again, I'd love for the other two to jump in. What do you think Trump's major asymmetrical advantages are over Harris right now? Oh, sorry. Is you know, he no longer has a money advantage.
Well, look, this will prove that I'm probably a right-wing troglodyte. I think his biggest advantage is the facts. I think we've been pulling together for the last 5 or 6 days the best of Kamala Harris, and you watch this stuff, it's nuts. I mean, it's both nuts at a personal level as she goes off on Venn diagrams, and the thing about the future is really going to be the future, and we ought to be in the future together when we're in the future. I mean, you watch this stuff and you think, you want this as a commander-in-chief? And then you look at her record and the things that she said over the years. For example, we ought to have tax-paid health care for illegal immigrants. This is her, not us. In fact, my advice to Republicans is don't attack her, just show her.
Right. So I would summarize. I would summarize what you said to three asymmetrical advantages that I think Trump has. One is he's passed the commander-in-chief threshold, not for every American, but he's been commander-in-chief. And let's be honest, he's a man, so he's got an advantage there. Two is she's got very liberal positions, and although the press isn't covering them very much, she's got a lot of liberal positions that are unpopular. And three, I would say, is she's got the Biden-Harris record to defend on it, particularly on immigration and inflation that Trump obviously doesn't have to defend.
Also, well, if I can, Mark, I'm going to go out on a limb for a second, and then everybody else can saw it off. Okay. I never forget the impact of Dukakis in a tank, or the impact of John Kerry windsurfing and then making up for windsurfing by proving he was normal by going goose hunting in a hunting outfit that had to come from Hollywood and was totally weird. I mean, there's a place here. Harris, more than any candidate, including them, has vulnerabilities of just being strange. And when you begin pulling them all together and looking at him and saying, does this really feel like a commander-in-chief? Is this a person you can trust with nuclear weapons? I think that's going to be as big a disadvantage as her actual record as a radical. But that's just me. Could be I'm too old.
Yeah. Doug, we'll get to Harris's asymmetrical advantages, but what do you think of the list we just discussed?
Let me clean up something the speaker said. I believe that John Kerry had left his price tag on that hunting jacket when he went out hunting. So I think the biggest advantage for Trump is the electoral map. It is stacked in the Republicans' favor. If we have a 46-46 election, Harris is going to lose. Going to win by 3.5, 4.5 points on the popular vote to be able to win the electoral vote, and that would be narrowly. And I think that I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. I think that having a secret ballot will probably help Trump. I just don't know. I think there's some people out there who are just not going to be comfortable with her as president, who may not be comfortable saying it out loud, but they're comfortable saying it in the ballot box. And I don't know, this is either going to be an advantage or a disadvantage for Trump, and we're going to find out. But I think the real Trump is Trump, just like Nixon. There's no new Nixon. There's not going to be a new Trump. So we know what we got. I think there's an open question though about Harris, and is she the caricature of who she's been for the first 3 years as vice president, or has she been, as Joe says, I mean, basically a rock star for the last 8 days, who is out there transcending politics, but has ease, looks like a happy warrior, is comfortable. And I think that's really the question that we don't know, which is how she's going to hold up.
Joe?
Everything Speaker Gingrich said about Kamala Harris, Democrats will have, and I would suggest 2 or 3 times on Trump, which again, quote after quote after quote, whether it's assassinating or trying for treason, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs or Mike Pence, or I'm not going to go down the long list, but it is a very long list. And so I think the speaker said it was going to be weird versus weird. And I think he may be right, but it may be new weird versus old weird. And I will say sometimes old weird is creepy weird. Like again, Trump in 16 was a disruptor. I don't know. I mean, he's not a disruptor in 24. And it's kind of like when you have the game films of one team, but the other team doesn't have the game films of the other. We've seen how Donald Trump acted with Hillary Clinton in the debate, how he acted with Joe Biden in the debate. We've seen this act for about 8 years. We haven't seen Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. So we'll see how that goes. But as far as the commander-in-chief threshold goes, again, I must say, I've loved politics, and my entire life, I've never been more uncomfortable with anybody's commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. And I don't think I'm alone there. So again, so much of this has to do with Kamala Harris and what the next 98, 99 days look like. And does she remain this pop culture figure, or do we get to a point where people are really starting to tear away at the issues? Yep. In a way, again, they just didn't with Barack Obama. Obviously, Barack Obama far more nimble politically to explain away Reverend Wright, to explain away Bill Ayers. But there's also just a real frustration, and I know the speaker could second this, and other Republicans could second this. It just didn't matter to Americans. I remember sitting next to Mike Murphy when we were watching Barack Obama's acceptance speech in Denver, and when it finished, he turned to me, he goes, "Houston, we got a problem." It's like, this guy is just in another league. And again, I'm not saying that Kamala Harris is Barack Obama or Ronald Reagan, but she certainly could make the next 99 days very interesting. And I will say also, the very things that the speaker said about Kamala Harris has actually, some of them, it's actually moved younger voters and moved people of color more towards her. I think this comes down to how much can she consolidate those numbers? Can it be like an 85-15 in the black vote? Can she hold Donald Trump to the low 30s when it comes to Hispanics? Can she come close to what Joe Biden was able to do with older white voters in the upper Midwest? I mean, that's what's so fascinating about this is Joe Biden's one strength was older white voters across the upper Midwest. Now that, and his weakness was with people of color and younger voters. And man, I heard it. I heard it all the time. I know, Mark, you did too. That's now changed. And it's going to be fascinating to see how she does with older white voters in Oshkosh, how she does with older white voters in Grand Rapids, how she does with older white voters in the suburbs of Philly.
Could I just could add, look, I agree with what Joe said about Obama, and Obama didn't really have a campaign in 2008. That was a political movement. But I think it was very unlikely McCain was going to win no matter what, because this country in general, particularly after 8 years of Bush, does not want one party to have the White House 3 elections in a row. It's only happened once since the 1940s, and that was in 1988. So I think tying it back here is, I think both of these candidates can claim the mantle of being the candidate for change. And I think that the country is going to want to vote for change. So the question is going to be, which definition of change are they going to be more attracted to? Trump talking about the 4 years of Biden-Harris, or Harris talking about, if you like the 1950s, you're going to love Donald Trump's view of the future.
Yeah. Doug, what are Harris's main asymmetrical advantages?
Well, I think that I think that she, at least for now, is really inspired passion in a lot of people to come out and vote. That certainly we're not going to in the past. And on paper, is what I said earlier, I say it again. On paper, she has the potential based on her ability to attract younger voters, non-white voters. But I think on paper, she has the potential to widen that electoral map to make those Sunbelt states competitive again.
Exactly.
3 out of 4 of them.
Yeah.
But she's also then, of course, going to have to try to hold where Biden was in those Midwestern states.
I think it is what Doug just said. So right. Georgia, I think Georgia comes back into play. A month and a half ago, I would have said she had absolutely no chance, or Biden had no chance of winning any of the Sunbelt states. So not only are you trading demographics of younger voters and everything else with older voters, you're also talking about bringing the Sunbelt back into play. And again, nobody knows anything. This is the sort of thing post Labor Day that clears up, and either Kamala Harris is still facing an uphill battle, or she's pulled ahead, and so we don't know. But I will say her asymmetrical advantages, what Donald Trump's asymmetrical advantage was in 2016, what Barack Obama's was in 2008, and that is she has the possibility, based on what I've seen, what I've heard, of actually being part of something bigger than just a political campaign, and it's more of a movement. That's the thing that Democrats never got with Trump, it was so much bigger than a political campaign. It was a movement. I'm sorry.
I want to read something to you. I want to read something to you that will get up on the screen soon, which is the Bloomberg battleground state polls just came out. Okay. And they're extraordinarily good for Harris. All swing states, Harris 48, Trump 47. Arizona, Harris up 2. Georgia even. Michigan, Harris up 11. Nevada, Harris up 2. North Carolina, Trump up 2. Pennsylvania, Trump up 4. Wisconsin, Harris up 2. So with the exception of Pennsylvania, those are extraordinarily good numbers, obviously,
I would
for
be,
Harris, and we'll get them up soon.
Follow up on, I mean, if I would be in the Harris campaign, I'd be very happy with that polling, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. I mean, it's better to have it than not. But just to reinforce what Jay said about Georgia. So every candidate, there are some states that they just aren't good fits, and the states don't like them. So for the Clintons, for instance, they always did badly in North Carolina. Trump has always done badly in Utah. Trump has always done badly in Georgia. They don't like him in Georgia. Democrats have won 3 senator elections since 2020 in Georgia. And
hey Doug, can I ask Newt about that really quickly, because I don't understand. So Newt, I was born in Georgia. I know you've represented Georgia. I've got a lot of family in Georgia. So you look at who the 2 senators are. You look at Joe Biden winning in 20, but more importantly, you look at how well Brian Kemp and Raffensperger did. I think it was in 22, where they ran against Donald Trump, and exclusive of all other Republicans in America, those Georgia Republicans basically told Donald Trump to get lost, and they won massively. And so I'm just curious, what do you see happening? Following up on what Doug said in Georgia, can you explain why that is? And is Georgia red? Is it purple? And what's going on inside the Republican Party regarding Donald Trump?
Go ahead and unmute, Mr. Speaker, please. There you
Okay. Well, this is just an observation. You have 3 different things going on. One is that Atlanta, as it has become bigger, somebody once said that when they adopted the tax laws to maximize the advantage of making movies and TV shows in Atlanta, they moved the state from red to purple, just because of who moved in. So there's a certain amount of truth to that, I think. The second is that Um, it's important not to underestimate the impact of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is in many ways to Georgia what the Washington Post is to the Virginia suburbs. So that you come out of Atlanta and the Atlanta area, if you're Trump, with some disadvantages you don't have. And then third, I would say, it's one of the few places in the country where, whether it's an anti-Trump behavior or just a pro Brian Kemp behavior, I'm not sure. My hunch is it's more pro Brian Kemp, but Kemp has a real machine. That real machine is not pro Trump. And it's one of the very few places. I mean, you say Hogan, but Maryland is a very blue state and not the
Yeah.
same commodity. I think it may be the only red state where you can actually be openly separate from Trump and survive. And that's a function of Brian's skills and his hard work. So all those things came to bear. And then frankly, if you look at how we lost in the two Senate races in 2020, I mean, it was criminal malpractice. You ended up with the Democrats cleverly being in favor of several $1,000 give back, and Mitch McConnell deciding he was against it, and the two Senate candidates deciding that they would be fiscally prudent in a state which is very there's the Trump vote in Georgia is very populist, which means that when you're talking about their pocketbook, they have a very real interest in you understanding they want the money. And so you had a campaign in which, in the closing days, it was the two Republican candidates who were against giving you the money. And the two Democratic candidates were saying cheerfully, well, of course you ought to have the money. And ironically, Trump was giving him the money. McConnell was against it. And the two Senate candidates, for reasons that are beyond my comprehension as a simple-minded politician, decided that they would be noble and go down in defeat, having pissed off. And you see this, by the way, you go to Northwest Georgia, which is in some ways the strongest area for Trump. This is the area that Marjorie is really strong in. Their vote dropped off dramatically in the runoff because they figured out these guys weren't going to be doing. These guys didn't understand me and didn't want to give me the money.
So, Mark, I just want to say briefly about Biden's narrow win in 2020 and the Democrats' special election narrow win in January of 2021. Both very close elections, but the outcome was driven by different constituencies. Biden beat Trump in Georgia based on white suburban votes. The special election for the Senate in January, the narrow margin of victory was different. It was due to a larger black turnout. So you had two very narrow elections, but what was driving the narrow Democratic victory was different in these two elections.
And it's such a fascinating split with Georgia and the rest of the Deep South. As somebody that was born in Atlanta, lived in Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, I will tell you, Georgia, we used to say Empire State of the South, and Georgians just see themselves as set apart from the rest of the South. Again, everybody just looks at the South as the South. It's not. It's kind of like when people say Texas is from the South, we all laugh. But my son went to University of Alabama. All of his friends from Alabama were all Trump supporters in 2020. All of his friends from Georgia, all of them. And by the way, these people were all Republicans. All of his friends from Georgia couldn't stand Trump and voted against him. There's something fascinating on the Alabama-Georgia state line that separates Georgia. And again, and you look at Brad Raffensperger tape recording Donald Trump. And again, Raffensperger, what did he win? It's like 62 to 30 something percent. That would have never happened in any other state other than maybe Utah in a Republican primary. And I think it's just extraordinary.
Yeah. All right, we're going to bring you folks in to ask questions or make comments. So you can ask Gingrich, Doug Sosnick, Joe. Tell us where you are today, who you're thinking of voting for, who you know you're voting for, and then ask whatever you want. And Sharon, start with you.
Well, thank you for doing this program. It's fascinating. I'm in South Carolina, probably going to vote for Trump. but I do want to give a piece of advice to the Republicans, or to the Democrats, sorry. Criticizing a candidate who happens to be female is not sexist. Everybody criticizes the candidates. At one point during the primaries, I was considering Ron DeSantis, and then he came across like a wet dish towel. That's what politics is. And I think if the Democrats are going to say anybody that criticizes Kamala Harris is sexist, they're also going to piss off women. I mean, I find that highly offensive, that you can't criticize a woman politician. I think it's a mistake.
So I would say two things, Sharon. First of all, I'm glad you live in South Carolina and not Pennsylvania. And secondly, you absolutely can criticize someone. It's how you do it. And Donald Trump has never, ever exercised a slightest bit of subtlety when he goes after someone in politics. Never once.
I think Donald Trump is his own worst enemy, but I'm talking about people in general, that if voters feel that if a voter feels that Kamala Harris comes across as inauthentic or not as comfortable in large crowds, it's the same problem happened with Hillary. America's not ready for a woman president. I think America's absolutely ready for a woman president. You just got to have the right one.
Do you think, let me ask you a question. Do you think when he gave a speech this weekend and he spent 5 minutes mocking her name and mispronouncing her name, and all that came with that, do you think it's okay?
No, I think he's his own worst enemy, but I have my own issues with the Democratic Party separate from Kamala that I just can't vote for.
Sharon, I need to respectfully remind you how to pronounce her name.
Oh,
Kamala, like comma.
Kamala.
No, Kamala, like comma, blah. There you go.
Kamala.
What do you like most about the vice president? Can you name anything you like about her?
I mean, right now she looks like she's having fun.
Ooh,
Yeah,
by the way, that's really strong. I do want to say, following up on running against a woman, my toughest campaign was my first primary campaign. I was running against a woman, and I would tell you, I completely agree. You ought to be able to criticize a woman. You ought to be able to criticize anybody that you're running against. Jeb Bush would always talk about the soft bigotry of low expectation, suggesting that you can't treat a woman like you treat a man. So I completely agree with you there. With this caveat, the best debate performance I ever turned in my life, I turned in against a woman, and it went so well. And I kept my voice down. I promise I was so polite. I kept my voice down, but it went so badly for her that people felt sorry for her, and it actually blew up in my face. It is the only county I ever lost in 8 years. I lost that county right after the debate because the newspaper in Fort Walton Beach thought that the crowd and everybody's being too mean to this woman I was debating. And I thought, man, it is a real, it just takes a special skill set to run against a woman. And I agree with everything you just said, but you still have to be careful.
Hey, Mark,
Sure.
do a little investigative
Thanks.
reporting, Mark. Go talk to the guys who did debate prep for Biden in 2008 against Sarah Palin and ask them what they spent the most time on in preparation for that debate. It was, how do you debate a woman?
Yeah.
How do you go after her in an appropriate way?
Yeah. Sharon, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Lauren Leader,
Thank
my
you.
two-way colleague, is here. Lauren, go ahead.
Oh, where to begin? I think Speaker Gingrich sort of set us up perfectly, actually, for this part of the conversation and for the last comment, I think from Sharon, was that her name, about the sort of the gender piece of it. And look, I mean, when Speaker Gingrich speaks about, is she ready to be commander in chief? Like, that's a completely legitimate question where it goes into sort of out of bounds gender dimension is when people say she's not ready to be commander in chief because they don't like the way she laughs or they don't think she's serious because she's smiling on the campaign trail, right? And there's been a lot of that already. So I think 2016 was so twisted up in knots in terms of just the inseparability of gender politics and sexism. And I've said this many times on this show, it was a very, very different time in the media. It was a very different time in America. It was a very different time on social media. There is definitely a heightened attention that people are paying to this, and they should go after her on the issues, on policy, on capability. But the problem is that even in just the first few days, and I've talked about this on Morning Joe, we have seen just an epic level of gendered and racist attacks against her, some of which have been generated by AI deepfakes, like the one that Elon Musk put out this week, which got 100 million views, that with a deepfake of her voice. So in order for any woman, and by the way, I would be talking about this, and I have talked about this when Nikki Haley was in the running. We do no favors to our democracy, or frankly to any woman on either side of the aisle, if we don't challenge these narratives, because we've only ever seen a man in these roles. So we're going to keep calling it out. It is fair game, but there's a real importance to paying attention.
Yep. Thank you. Stay with us. Brian, unmute, please. Come on in. Question or comment.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Thanks again. I have a question, which is, aside from David Plouffe, if you were Kamala Harris, who would you want to bring onto the campaign to help get you across the line for these 90 days?
For those who don't know, Brian is a Democratic voter in California. Joe, and then Doug.
I think everybody. I would get Rahm Emanuel. I'd say, I hope you enjoyed Japan. Now come home. David Plouffe. I would just go down the list and flood the zone. You've got 99 days. And let me tell you something. I mean, just think about that. The combination of David Plouffe and Rahm Emanuel to be able to guide the campaign that long, along with, the great hands that they have on board right now. That's not taking away from, Jen O'Malley Dillon ran an extraordinary campaign in 2020. But I would bring everybody on board. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, Mr. Speaker, whenever a campaign's going well, the people running it are heroes. I have, as you have, embraced Susie and Chris and others. But as you pointed out, they seem at least a little bit flat-footed. Do they need to rethink their structure, or you think they just need a few days to regroup?
Oh, I think they just need to look. I have a hunch that Susie and Chris are quite capable of doing for Kamala, if did I say that right?
You did, comma, like the punctuation mark.
I have people here on my team trying to train me to say it right, so I don't sound like I'm being inappropriate.
Kamala.
So
Kamala, just comma.
I believe that they are prepared to do for Kamala what they did for the governor of Florida. And I think that they're getting their ducks in a row, but they're quite confident that they will have lots of ducks. And that, and I can't tell you that the stuff that my small team has unearthed, the video is so mind-blowing that the idea that this is the Democratic nominee makes you almost think that Biden would have been better. I mean, I think because of the current flurry of the elite media, the fact that some places are actually going back and changing their archives to pretend that she was never called czar, for example. There's going to be this sugar high, but I'll tell you, I would not want to have all of the video that Chris and Susie have to sit there and pick and choose and think through. They're trying to figure out right now, what is the single definition which makes the race unwinnable for the Democrats?
Yeah.
Because
So
then
Brian,
you-
thank you.
I just don't think it's fair, because again, you've got right now with Kamala Harris the same thing you have with Donald Trump, in that somebody very close to Donald Trump always told him, Donald, you're like a tie-dye t-shirt. Every politician wears a white shirt. If they have a little stain on it, everybody notices it. You have a tie-dye t-shirt, you can have as many stains as you want. People don't care. It's baked into the equation. The thing that I keep hearing about Kamala Harris is nobody says that she's JFK. They go, we understand. Basically, she's not Barack Obama. We understand she's not there, but she's incredible. Like I've made the joke. It's kind of like they're holding the limbo bar at 6 feet, and she's walking under it, and they're going, "Oh my God, she's amazing at it!" Because right now she's bigger than a politician, which is when politicians become movements. She represents everything that Donald Trump and JD Vance do not represent. So again, I don't think people are going to say, oh, look at this clip from 7 years ago or 8 years ago, or look at this or look at that. Right now, if they manage it correctly, I do think that there are Democrats know exactly what they have, and they're thrilled.
Let me say two things. Yeah, go ahead, Doug. Go
Two quick things. First of all, I mean, it's not like Joe Biden was a 50-year-old guy who had a heart attack and died, and all of a sudden the Trump campaign's waking up saying, now what are we going to do? I mean, it is political malpractice for having watched Biden watch the polls, to have Biden announce on a Sunday at 2 o'clock he's getting out of the race, and 8 days later the Trump guys are trying to figure out what is their narrative against Harris. That's political malpractice. And the other thing I'll say is they've run a very good campaign except for that. And what they realized was basically the best way for Trump to do well was to not campaign. He did very little campaigning in the primaries. He barely went to Iowa. He barely went to New Hampshire. And the best thing, ever happened to him was when the judge put a muzzle on him, he couldn't speak at the trial. So what they're going to do is run a version of the 2020 Biden campaign and keep him in the basement and basically try to knock the bark off of Kamala Harris's tree. And that's going to be their strategy.
Okay. Let me say two things, and then I want to bring in Michael Bix, my former colleague, who's delighted to have him here. Number one, if Kamala Harris loses this election, history is going to scrutinize quite a bit the Democrats' decision to give her the nomination without a contest. It's going to be a remarkably faithful
history's
24
going to
hours.
be about Joe Biden allowing the
Well,
party
that
to
too.
get to
That
110 days before an election, and we have to switch horses.
That too, but didn't have to be Harris. And the other thing is, I wrote this the other day, Chris LaCivita has never lost an election to someone even half as liberal as Kamala Harris. Doesn't mean he's going to win this one, but it's just factually the case. Michael Bix, go ahead, please.
Now, I'm curious what folks' reaction to the first Trump commercial that came out today, because to me, it sort of looked like something from, I don't know, the late 90s, and it looked so ham-handed that you thought, like, what are these people up to? I mean, it was just sort of the dancing. I mean, it was just so amateurish. I mean, clearly going to vote for Kamala, but you were just looking at this going, is this really going to play?
You mean you just didn't like the production values? Or you didn't like the message?
It looked like such a cut and paste job that it didn't do a very good job of taking her apart. You're just looking at this going, people are just going to be annoyed by this. It's difficult to see how that's going to move the needle on anybody who's not completely committed to Trump, especially when you have somebody who basically, Kamala, who's just turning up. I mean, every commercial right now for her is about hope. And then you sort of have this sort of commercial that's down in the gutter, and you think, is that how you fight hope? I mean, is that how you fight a outside a movement?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Did any of the four of you see the ad? I talked about it this morning on the morning meeting, but I think the Trump campaign is going to upgrade its production quality. I'm confident of that. Vincent, give me a thumbs up with your real thumb if you're a Trump supporter. So, Vincent, are you a Trump supporter? No, you're not a Trump supporter. All right, I saw you shaking your head. of the folks who have your hands up, raise your hand if you're your real hand if you're a Trump supporter, just because I want to get a Trump person in here. Maybe none of you with your hands up are Trump supporters. That's, I would say, not perfect. All right, let's bring in Pat, who is not a Trump supporter, but he was a governor of a battleground state. Pat McCrory, former governor of North Carolina, former mayor of Charlotte. Governor, welcome.
I was tired of hearing from these Georgia guys that are, barely border North Carolina up there in the mountains. So, two quick perspectives.
Who are you going to vote, Governor? Who are you going to vote for?
I'm not saying. I've got a PBS program now. I can't say, but okay. It's going to be being a no labels guy. It's a very difficult vote for me. Very difficult.
Okay. Floor is yours, Governor, please.
Very quickly, one is Chris LaCivita was my campaign manager in 2016 that I lost by 10,000 votes out of 4.6 million. But I am impressed how he's controlling Trump better than anyone has. And I anticipate the production getting better. The second thing, I want to compliment the Harris campaign. I thought they handled the transition of getting rid of Governor Cooper, who did defeat me, in a very professional way by letting him go out on his own terms, even though it was probably made up. It made it look like he didn't want to do it, as opposed to being not selected by someone else. The reasons he gave are nowhere close to being the truth here in North Carolina, but it was a pretty nice way the Harris campaign handled him. And he handled it, which I got to give credit to the Harris campaign, because it makes him viable in North Carolina and maybe keeps North Carolina in play too. And the last thing I'll say is to Speaker, Georgia got all the film industry, because I cut the film subsidies in North Carolina and I paid for it with votes, but we saved a hell of a lot of money.
Governor, do you think that Harris has a better chance than Biden in North Carolina?
Yes. I think the dilemma for the Republic, I think without Harris, we probably would have swept the Council of State with a very poor governor's candidate, but we would have got lieutenant governor, governor, treasurer, you name it. But with her in it now, I anticipate the college campuses being much more excited, and they were flat before Harris came on. So I anticipate that. Although we have to remember, and I say this to Joe, is that only 30% of young people go to college. So when we think of young people, we got to remember most of them don't go to college. Most of them either community college or they're working. And that's a different type of voter. And it's going to be interesting if they come out and vote. And will they be the blue collar voter that Trump's going after?
Yeah, it really is. I completely agree. I think what I heard with a child in college in the spring was the college students were not only flat towards Joe Biden, they were hostile, and outwardly hostile because of Gaza, because you name it. And that's changed really dramatically. But you are right, that's 30%. And so, I mean, in a state like North Carolina, obviously that's going to make a pretty big difference. I don't know about the other swing states, but it certainly
we also out-of-state students can vote in North Carolina. Kind of a quirky rule. There's a little, which made a difference in my race too.
Oh, well.
So that's
Governor, can I ask you about North Carolina? We've talked through the years about how Georgia was going red to purple and then maybe blue, and we'll see this year if that's the case. North Carolina was so close last time, and it really does seem, as the speaker said, it's like an urban rural thing. And Georgia, Atlanta is so dominant in Georgia, and you don't quite yet have that in North Carolina. But how close is North Carolina getting to tipping to being much more purple? Is that inevitable or not?
Well, the COVID's swinging some red votes to North Carolina at the coast, the rural coastal towns. So everyone moving to the beaches from New York and New Jersey during COVID. But the real thing that's happening in North Carolina, and has happened going all the way back to Jesse Helms against Jim Hunt, is that we have a tradition of a Democrat winning the governorship, except for me and Jim Martin, but Jesse Helms, with a few exceptions, like John Edwards, winning, mainly Republicans like Tom Tillis, easily winning the Senate race. So that Southern Democrat splits their vote in North Carolina. And it's only a small percentage, but it's enough to swing an election. Does that make sense?
Yeah, how does that play out in the presidential race, though? I mean, as far as long-term
I don't
trends.
think they'll win. I think the Republicans will still win. Will hang on, but it could be 1 or 2 points. But that's because some Democrats split their vote. They'll vote for a Democratic governor and a Republican president. That's because their spouse maybe is a school teacher.
Yeah, Governor, thank you. Great to see you. I want to get Doug, then a quick comment from Lauren, and then I want to talk about beef steaks real quick.
Just real quick,
ahead,
there's one big geographic difference in North Carolina than these other states, which is there's a disproportionately large percentage of people who live in exurban areas. And if you just look at the demography of where people live and how they vote, that is the big difference in North Carolina from these like Virginia and some of these other places that have gone blue is that.
Yep. Thank you, Doug. Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that when we talk about the ads and we talk about the advantages and the sort of extra advantages, and also I think the governor's really smart point about the non-college educated young people, it is all TikTok. And the way in which the Harris campaign has been able to just sort of step aside and let the social media universe help her win is pretty extraordinary. And I think that actually has a huge potential impact on all those young people who aren't getting organized on college campuses. Now, whether that translates to votes, we don't know. But like the social media operation, they're leaving Trump in the dust. They don't even have anything near. It's not even close.
Yeah.
So can I ask a question, Mark, of you and Lauren? I got off TikTok because I don't like helping the communist Chinese government. And yet everybody I talk to says this is going to be the TikTok election. I mean, again, I won't be on TikTok for that reason, but is this going to be, Mark?
I think it's impossible to measure quantitatively right now how much the Harris people have eaten into Trump's lead on social, including on TikTok. Trump had a huge lead before in terms of organic, and now it's more equal, but I don't think he can measure it yet. But it's clearly going to be a fairer fight than it was with Biden, without a doubt, even though Biden belatedly got on the platform. I warn our affiliates, we're going to go a little bit over, but I want to talk about beef steaks. Reuters is now reporting a little bit while ago. Thank you for the person who texted it to me. No announcements expected this weekend, but it could come Monday. And again, they previously reported that she's going to go on a tour with her running mate. I continue to believe that Governor Shapiro is the fulcrum here. It's either him or it's not him. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think they're either going to pick him or this is much more fluid. I want to show you a soundbite from Governor Shapiro that I want you to see if it reminds you of a former president. Go ahead and play that bite if you would.
Because here's what I know. It's not freedom to tell our children what books they're allowed to read. That's not freedom. It is not freedom to tell people they can go to work, but they can't join a union. That's not freedom. It is not freedom to tell women what they're allowed to do with their bodies. That's not freedom. That's what he's all about, because here's what.
Okay. So once upon a time, when I thought that if Joe Biden stepped aside, the nominee was going to be that guy. Once upon a time, when I thought he was going to be the running mate, it was for that. It was for that level of performance, which I think is extraordinary. To me, it sounds a little bit like Barack Obama, a little bit like Bill Clinton. Really strong. So I'd love for you all to say as we close here, who you think, if you have any sense of who it's going to be, but also which running mate do you think would give the Harris ticket the best chance of winning this race? Joe, start with you.
you've got to nail down. You've got to take control of the beachhead, and Pennsylvania is the beachhead, and whatever problems he has regarding how he staff issues in the past that Philadelphia Inquirer's talked about. It's eclipsed by the fact that he's extraordinarily popular in Michigan. I mean, in Pennsylvania. And I think the biggest problem is Michigan and the Arab American population there. But if there are internal polls that show that she's up, let's say even 5 or 6, I don't believe the Bloomberg poll that it's 11 in Michigan, then I would take Shapiro, nail down Pennsylvania, and work out from there.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, give us a sense of who would be the strongest pick.
Well, I think Shapiro will be the strongest pick on 2 grounds. One is he's the only one who gives them a shot at Pennsylvania. I mean, if they don't pick him, they'll lose Pennsylvania. And the other is that she would then have to stand up to the more militant elements of the Muslim community over the whole issue of Gaza, et cetera. And who knows what that would do for the quality of life in Chicago during the convention week, but it'll be close to her sister soldier moment to prove she really is not automatically on the left and not automatically captive. My hunch is they won't do that. If I were betting tonight, I think it'll be the governor of Minnesota, because it's the choice with the least negative consequences. But there's no doubt in my mind, Shapiro would be the best choice for her.
Doug?
I think between the politics and the vetting of some of these guys, I don't think there's actually that many options for her. And I'd be astonished if she doesn't pick Shapiro.
Astonished. Okay, that's pretty strong. I want to thank everybody for participating. Speaker Gingrich, Congressman Scarborough, Doug Sosnick, Lauren, and then all the people who got in. Again, lots of hands up. I'm sorry. We try not to try to run too far over, but grateful to everybody for participating. Governor McCrory as well. Couple notes. Again, appreciate how civil everybody was. If you're new to this platform, it's the kind of conversations we have here. Lauren Leader was going to be on at 6 with the 2 women who organized the record-breaking Zoom meeting for Kamala Harris. That's going to be rescheduled because of logistical issues, so we'll look for an announcement on that. And I will be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time on Two-Way with Tim Hogan, Sean Spicer, preview the day for you. It's going to be a big day tomorrow. There's lots going on, including a Trump rally in Pennsylvania, and we all know how important Pennsylvania is. So grateful to everybody for participating. You'll be able to watch this on YouTube in just a little bit. If you missed part of it, you can share it with your friends. Again, Speaker Gingrich, Joe, Doug, thank you guys in particular. We'll see you again tomorrow, 9 a.m. Thank you.